The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus told his disciples this parable. A man was going on a journey, called in his servants, and entrusted his possessions to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to a third 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. Immediately, the one who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5. Likewise, the one who had made 2 made another 2. The man who received 1 went off and dug a hole in the ground and buried his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants came back and settled accounts with them. The one who had received 5 talents came forward, bringing the additional 5. He said, "Master, you gave me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more." His master said to him, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. Since you have been faithful in small matters, I will give you great responsibilities. Come, share your master's joy." The one who had received 2 talents also came forward and said, "Master, you gave me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more." His master said to him, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. Since you were faithful in small matters, I will give you great responsibilities. Come, share your master's joy." Then the one who had received the 1 talent came forward and said, "Master, I knew you were a demanding person, harvesting where you did not plant and gathering what you did not scatter. So out of fear, I went off and buried your talent in the ground. Here it is back." His master said to him in reply, "You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I did not plant and gather where I did not scatter. Should you not have put my money in the bank so that I could have it back with interest upon my return? Now then, take the talent from him and give it to the one with 10. For everyone who has, more will be given, and he will grow rich. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And throw this useless servant into the darkness outside, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth." The Gospel of the Lord. So that's a very interesting, complicated story about this wealthy landowner who was preparing for this long journey. And so he calls in these 3 servants and divided his money between them, quote, "each according to their ability." And that's a very important part of that parable. To one servant he gave 5 talents, meaning a sum of money, to a second 2, and to a third 1. So as I researched this parable and preparing this homily for today, I read a couple of scholars that each talent, according to St. Matthew, each talent equaled about 20 years worth of wages. So no mean sum. So for Matthew, a talent didn't equal, you might say, a single bar of gold or a $5,000 treasury note. Each talent represented a worth that was a huge amount. So that means that we shouldn't feel too sorry for the servant who only got 1. The owner was not only wealthy, but he was extravagant. He was extravagant in his trust towards the stewards, his servants. And so while those numbers are astounding, Jesus' emphasis is on the way each servant understood his relationship to the owner. Also very important. For two of them, the master's trust impelled them to imitate his risky behavior. His risky behavior and giving them the courage and the motivation and the incentive to trade or to work with the owner's fortune, assuming the risk of loss for the hope of gain. Assuming the risk of loss for the hope of some gain in the future. So those first two servants gave the owner, you might say, the highest compliment possible by imitating him. The third person placed his faith in the value of what he had at hand. And so, fearing the consequences of a loss, he played it safe. He played it safe, effectively repudiating the owner's lavish approach to life. One question I think about reflecting upon this gospel is why the division? Why 5? Why 2? Why 1? Why does it work that way? Again, it's important to remember Jesus isn't speaking about a $100 bill or 1 bar of gold, but he's speaking about a gift, freely given. Enough blessings to launch these 3 into the world according to their abilities. Again, a very important line. So, why is life like that? Why is life like that for us? I don't know. But I did hear this very beautiful, powerful reflection by a lifelong curate parishioner at the Autumn Mission this past week who spoke about so many gifts he had received in his vocation as a medical doctor, as a family man, as a person of faith, a person of many gifts that he decided to share. Yes, we're all equal in the eyes of God. We're guaranteed equal rights, at least in America, under the Constitution. But when it comes to our abilities, we are as different can be. God simply didn't make us all the same. So there are some people who can handle 5 talents, and there are some who can handle maybe 1 or 2. I'm blessed enough to get through with 1 1/4, perhaps. There are some folks who have great intellectual capacities and some who don't. There are some who have the ability to project and articulate their thoughts, and there are others who struggle with that. There are some who have physical strength and attractive looks, and there are some who appear average. The important thing to remember is that each servant was given something, some gift, some blessing, some talent, some grace. No one was left idle. You may not be a 5-talent person, but you have some talent. We all do. And you know, I think there are a whole lot more 1 and 2 talent people in this world than there are 5-talent people. Yes, some people seem to have it all, sure, but most of us are, usually 1 or 2 gifts that we have that we try to develop to the best of our abilities. And that's okay. It's good enough for God, the Master, the Owner, the Lord, who created us uniquely to be who He created us to be. It's interesting to note that in the 25th chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel, there are these 3 parables that we're hearing at this time of the year. The parable of the 10 virgins, or the 10 bridesmaids that we heard last Sunday. The parable of the sheep and the goats, the story of the Last Judgment that we will hear next Sunday on Christ the King, and the parable of the talents that we hear today. Essentially, the same phrase is used in all 3 parables, which says, quote, after a long time. After a long time. So last week, the bridegroom comes after a long time. Today, the landowner returns after a long time. The judgment comes at the final judgment after a long time. And so perhaps this is St. Matthew's way of saying to us, our master will be delayed in his return. But in the meantime, in the meanwhile, the question is, what are you doing with the talent? What are you doing with the life that is entrusted to you, to me, to all of us? And one issue is definitely clear. God expects a return. God expects some return. We had better not simply bury that which has been given to us and return it whenever the time comes exactly as we got it. The obvious star, or rather the focal point, you might say the villain of the story, is the one-talent guy. And the question is, why? Why did he choose to do little or nothing with the one talent that had been given to him? Well, there's really no exact answer to that. It's not given, it's not spelled out intentionally by Jesus, because he leaves all of these parables for us to figure out in our own lives. It could be he simply buried his treasure out of fear, because that's the way they did things in those days. When they had money, they put it in the ground for safekeeping. It could be that the third guy had this maybe if only mentality. If only I had been given 2 or more or 5 talents, I would have accomplished something with part of what I have received. Or he could have simply said to himself, what real difference? What real difference is my one puny little blessing, gift, talent really going to make in this big world that we're in? So we are left to speculate as to the rationale about the third guy. And that is what's so impactful and challenging about the parables of Jesus. This story reminds me and is somewhat similar to the story of the prodigal son, because after a long time of squandering the father's wealth, the younger kid finally returns home. And after a long time of simply doing his job and expecting a big repayment, the older son doesn't see that the father loves him equally as well. So the parables are left for us to try to figure out and to put ourselves in there. So we don't know whether the older son went to the party or whether the younger son actually enjoyed the party. It's for us to fill in. In between the first and the second reading today, we might have a little bit of an insight into the one talent rationale. Because as we heard in that first reading, the psalm says, "Blessed are those who fear the Lord." Some people hear that phrase, fear, as a grim reminder of the final judgment, meaning fearing the one who has been watching for our missteps and will bring us to justice. But the underlying meaning to understanding the fear of the Lord is really the awe that we should sense when glimpsing the overwhelming grace and the bounty of the loving creator of the universe manifest in all creatures, great and small. Grim, fearful, if only people will respond with, well, what do you think? Well, with prudent timidity. Prudent timidity, striving to avoid any possible mistake. But others will be moved to imitate the unrestrained generosity of God, who has put so much into our hands. They trust, and the fact that we're all here today, we trust that the owner, that God, understands the risks of life. And he will stay with us through it all, even if we lose some or all of the talents in the process of life, giving back. Remember the story of the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan who stopped to help a beaten victim on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. If you remember that story, he didn't resolve all the social or political or economic ills of first century Israel. But what did he do? He did what he could. He did what he could with the talent, with the gift, with the grace to notice and to care. And that is the issue for us. So, are we doing what we can, where we're at, and with whatever blessings that we have from God? This week, our nation celebrates a secular holiday with so many religious and spiritual overtones. Thanksgiving Day is a time of national gratitude, and it's a remembrance that invites us to contemplate the prodigal trust God shows. The prodigal trust God shows by allowing us to participate in the ongoing work of creation according to our own abilities. And so, to whom much or less, slightly less or a lot less, to whom much or less has been given, much will be expected, at least in thanksgiving to the God, the giver of all gifts and blessings.